So hello and welcome to VideoCam and AudioCam for Cam Scotland. My name's Scott Docherty and I'm here today with Bonnell. Karen is a board certified clinical nurse specialist and divorce and co-parenting coach with decades of experience working with individuals, couples and teams. She's the author of the immensely practical and inspirational Co-Parents Handbook and also the Parenting Plan Handbook. And in Seattle runs Coach Mediate Consult, which, amongst other things, helps couples and parents transition after their separation. So, welcome, Karen.
Oh, Scott, thank you so much. I'm very glad to be here.
Excellent. So we're talking today about parenting plans. In Scotland, although it's been milling around for a number of years, it seems that we're only now beginning to wake up to the concept of parenting plans or agreements. So for those who've never heard of them, can you explain firstly what a parenting plan is?
Absolutely. A parenting plan is a plan. It's a legal document here in the States, particularly here in my jurisdiction in Washington State, that actually provides guardrails or guidelines. Actually, I think of it as a conflict manager, if nothing more. It allows parents to safely understand how they're going to share their child or children across all kinds of time. And it's specified so that those parents don't need to argue or fight or negotiate about how to care for their children. The parenting plan covers residential issues like how do we spend holidays, but it also covers non-residential issues like how do we resolve conflict and how do we make decisions. So there are many important aspects to a parenting plan beyond just the residential schedules. Mostly keep in mind it's guideposts. It's decisions ideally made together so that parents can go on and raise children healthily and wholly throughout their childhood.
Sure. Well, you mentioned something interesting there about how over in Washington it's a legal document. Just to be clear, in Scotland it's not considered a legal document at the moment. And a parenting plan at the moment can be entered into more as a framework of understanding between separating parents, and something therefore that might encourage them to avoid court. But just want to describe a little bit how the difference between it being a legal document over in Washington.
Sure. I think that many years ago here, you would have had a similar framework of understanding, like a memorandum, if you will. And part of the value of making that a legal document, at least from my point of view here, is that it gives it a little bit more teeth. In other words, parents take more seriously their commitments to one another as co-parents and to their children's sense of family. We want to remember that what we've learned about separation and divorce is that what's destructive for children is when they lose their sense of family. So we help parents recognize that although they're living in separate residences, they're still raising a child or children together in a healthy way. So this legality, if you will, gives it some teeth, gives it some meaning that wasn't there before. And of course, in situations where we have a lack of safety for a child, if we have complex family situations, then the legal document also helps guide us to ensure that children are safe in their two-home families.
Sure. I'll maybe come on later to talk a wee bit about that. But in your parenting plan handbook, you talk about separating parents forming a business relationship and approaching their new life as they might do at work. Can you expand on that a little, please?
Yes. You know, one of the tough issues when we go from being both intimate partners and parents, as if they're one, united together, we have to untangle the two and recognize that we don't want the mistakes that caused the end of our marriage to tumble forward now and be part of a destructive co-parenting relationship. So I work with parents to separate the two. You've ended your intimate partnership. That is one level of relationship. But as parents, you're forming a new relationship. Not that it's new to be a parent. You've been a parent. But the way that you're going to relate around parenting is perhaps new. Some parents may have never even had these skills when they were married. So we develop a business type relationship. I call it co-parent executive officers. Those are the decision makers. And co-parent financial officers, which is managing the financial elements of raising your children. So those pieces are really, really important. It guides how we communicate, what we communicate about, and how we solve problems that are inevitably going to come up as we raise healthy, growing kidlets across time.
Yeah, so do you find then in calling it a business relationship, and you mentioned a few business terms there, do you find it's an easier sell for people who are in business, and the other side, more difficult for people who aren't in a business type relationship at work?
You know, here's what I'm after. More than necessarily understanding what a co-parent executive officer might be, is that I really want to talk about a relationship that's more neutral. In other words, we're going to siphon off all that emotionality that belonged to perhaps a broken heart or belonged to a betrayal. We want to remove that. So whatever our language might be, colleagues, co-parent executive officers, what we're moving toward are terms that help me as a co-parent remember I want to behave in a way that I would behave with someone at work, with a boss, with a trusted friend. I don't mistreat them. I don't send flaming emails to them. Why would I do that to my child's other parent? So that's what I'm after. And yes, I think it's easier to help people change their mind, perspective when they recognize, oh, this is now a relationship that isn't complicated by all those old emotions.
That's right, that's right. So what do you think the main challenges are then in creating this business relationship and developing a parenting plan?
You know, it is separating those deep, deep emotions that often come with making the decision to end an intimate partnership. Oftentimes people do not arrive at that decision together. And so there's a lot of emotion that needs to be processed in order for me to remember that although I may be very, very angry with you, if you were my partner, Scott, I might be very angry with you. My children aren't married to you. My children, our children, belong to both of us. Their hearts, their little hearts in their chest belong to both of us. And so I have to do some mental gymnastics to get there, to remember that I want my children to be whole. I want them to have a sense of family. I want them to be healthy. So I have to separate my own feelings of upset from my regard as a parent. That's the work.
Yes, that's right. And so for those watching or listening, they may think that, okay, that sounds pretty ideal, but here in the real world, we know that things don't go as smoothly as that. I thought it might be useful then to think about some of the concerns that might arise when parties are asked to consider forming this relationship, this new relationship, or creating a parenting plan. So first of all, the book, in your book you envisage that a parenting plan will still be considered where one of the parents has a history of addiction or incarceration or even abuse. For the plan itself would factor in how that parent might reconcile with the children. Can you explain why in cases like that a plan might still be considered appropriate, and also how the other parent in that situation can even think about communicating with the other in creating that plan?
Absolutely. So again, let's go back to how children are bonded to parents. Even if a parent has made grave errors or has complex mental health or health-related issues like addiction, that child still identifies that parent as mine, right? That's my dad, that's my mom. And so as a consequence of that, our obligation to that child is to create the safety that allows that relationship to them, their sense of relationship with that parent, to be as constructive as it possibly can. And when we tell a child that they have a parent who is bad or highly judged, that child carries that shame, that judgment, that hurt, regardless of whether they show it on the outside or not. Now, let's be really clear. Children need to be safe. And so a parenting plan that includes a child, for example, being able to visit a parent who might be incarcerated. Okay, let's just talk about that for a moment. Then that has to be done very skillfully. And that needs to be done with protection, and that child needs adequate support. But what we find is that when parents are willing and we allow that to happen, kids are stronger. Kids are better for it. Now, is that easy? Absolutely not. Does it often involve a third party? Yes. A professional who might be escorting this child through this process and not putting a parent who may have been involved in domestic abuse or intimate partner violence with someone. We would not make that or even consider that appropriate. But with the safety of a supervisor, with the safety of a professional, we might be able to create a situation where that child doesn't lose a parent, which is very devastating. Is that helpful?
Of course, it's a very forward way of thinking, though, because in our jurisdiction, perhaps the thought might be that if there was that kind of history, then full stop, there would be no discussion about parenting plans.
Right.
That may come in years to come, but it's interesting you say that.
Right. Well, our hope is to at least hold the possibility that people can heal, people can change, people can grow. Now, some people don't, and that's a given, right? That being said, for a child who has many, many years to think about this parent who is my only father, my only mother, whatever the case may be, the idea that that parent may one day stop using, may one day stop drinking, lives as a hopeful place for every child. Anybody who is listening, who grew up in a family with complex issues, knows exactly what I'm talking about. Yes. So we're simply really acknowledging what is true for children, and how can we best then also support that ongoing sense of hope and optimism in a world where, frankly, judgment is quite harmful. The judgment piece is what can be very harmful. Never compromise safety, but let's set the judgment aside. Let's call it what it is, complex health issues.
That's right. And as you say, there would be support there, and from the legal point of view and from society point of view, there would be the necessary safeguards to allow that discussion to happen.
And not provoke the other parent to have to be directly involved with someone who they are very frightened of or may have been harmed by. Yeah.
So thinking about the conflict that exists between separating parents, designing a parenting plan suggests that they'll have to think quite deeply and into the future in quite forensic detail about this new business relationship and the lives of their children. For the parents that are exhausted, embedded into the conflicts and not used to thinking constructively, they might think it easier to ask a third party, in other words, a judge, to sort things out for them. So in that situation, what do they need to hear or understand to begin that transition?
Great question. So the first is, yes, a third party can make decisions about your children and about your family life. That's a possibility, and sometimes it's necessary. But if I can sit with co-parents long enough to say, are you sure you wouldn't prefer the self-determination, the ability to make these decisions yourself with enough guidance? If you can tolerate kind of sitting in the fire enough to find the safety to make these decisions yourself, over the next 15 years of raising these children together, would that possibly not be in your best interest and your children's best interest? So we come back to that mediation model where, again, we have to create the safety for that to happen and the guidelines for that to happen. But most parents, given the choice, will vote for self-determination about their own children, not to have some judge who doesn't know them, who doesn't know their children, making decisions that are now childhood lasting about their family. right?
Sure.
You know, Scott, I often start by asking parents sitting in my office to think about high school graduation.
Okay.
Right? So they maybe have a 7-year-old, right? He's in grade 2. And I say, okay, I want you to go to high school graduation. I want you to think about, you're not sitting together, but you're both there. And you're looking at this now 18-year-old young man. And I walk them through that day as that graduation ceremony concludes. And that young man is walking out of the ceremony. And what do we want this child, now man, to experience? Is it knowing that your dad and I will meet you at the water fountain, where that young man can walk out so proud of himself to his parents who are also proud, right? Or do we remain in a situation of hatefulness, enmity, and stress, where all he can think about on the day of his graduation is, who am I going to speak to first, and whose feelings will I hurt?
Yeah, that's right. It's a good analogy to paint for them, and I've seen similar analogies used with Christmas. You know, the memories. What memories do you want to leave your children for Christmas, and that kind of idea.
Right. And the interesting part for our holidays is that although we may separate holidays, our children often have a full and wonderful experience of Christmas with you, and then they get a full and wonderful experience of Christmas with me. But you only get one graduation. You only get one wedding.
Yeah.
You only get one baby naming of your first grandchild. What do you want that to look like? And what skills do you want to start to build right now? Because those days will come, God willing, right?
Yeah, of course. Although I suppose parties going into mediation or consultation with yourself, they might be distracted with the conflict, and you know, they can't see that far into the future, albeit that you're trying to paint a picture for them. Do you find that having done that, it's easier for them to transition?
I absolutely. And most parents can go with me to high school graduation. It's not that far away, even when we're talking about a toddler, because they're facing moments, that appointment at the pediatrician's office, they're already facing moments that remind them that one day this child will be a young adult. And most of the time, I can get them to sit with me. I'll be honest, most of the time there are tears.
Yeah.
And that brings up something very, very important. Keep in mind that the conflict, the anger, the enmity is often the other side of the love coin. Hatefulness is actually the other side of love. Once I have let go, once I have grieved, once I have worked my way through my feelings, I actually feel indifferent.
Yeah.
And so I help parents understand that all of that negative connection, all of that anger, all that enmity is really just disappointment in a new outfit. And so again, doing that grief work, there is nothing more frightening or unsettling than thinking about being away from your children, sharing them with someone who has so disappointed you. That's difficult.
Yeah, that's right, and that's reflected in one of the inspirational quotes in your book. It was one by Kristin Little, and she mentioned that learning to cooperate with the children's other parent doesn't always mean agreement. It doesn't always mean that you've got good feelings towards that other parent. It means that your love and care for your child is stronger than your anger and your sadness. And that your desire for peace is greater than your desire to be right. But how can parents distracted by conflict begin to see that?
Oh, Scott, that's a great question. I think that's part of why I wrote the books, is because sometimes just to sit and read Kristin's beautiful piece on that insight and inspiration starts to knock on a door inside your own heart, that you know where truth lies, right? And so it's a gentle walk. It's never a shaming walk. It's a gentle walk of, first of all, the optimism that you can do this, and that your motherhood or your fatherhood so far surpasses this moment in time, these weeks, these months of sorting through the separation. If I can just help a parent connect to that, we can calm things down. The other part is I give them, for lack of a better term, I give them rules. Do not send angry emails. Here's what you can put in an email. Here's what you are allowed to text. If you find you want to talk about these other things over here, no, off limits, do not do it. Parents are hungry to do it right. I think if you ask any parent, however upset they are, they don't want to harm their children. That I can guarantee you. And so helping them understand what does harm children, what does disadvantage children, what will be destructive, that's where I get them to connect with me. That's where I can get them to begin to really focus on how to be constructive co-parents.
Sure, sure. One of the issues we come across commonly here, I'm not sure if it's the same over there, it's that of the separating parent who considers herself or himself the primary carer, the primary caregiver.
Right.
In other words, he or she cared most for the children before the separation, and feels it's not right to compromise and facilitate their co-parent spending more times with the kids when they perhaps perceive that the other parent just wasn't interested before the separation. Can this get in the way of developing a parenting plan, and how would you handle that?
Yes, it certainly can. There are so many factors involved in that decision. One is whether both parents have a primary relationship with those children. It depends how much away, how detached was that other parent, frankly. Most of the time, at least here in our area, what I find is I've had a very busy parent who has spent the marital agreements where I am going to help build our community and make sure that we have a home to live in and a car to drive. That's been my job, and I've committed. That's how I've cared for you and our children and our life space. And in that commitment, never once thought, I don't want to be a parent to my children. Never once thought, I'm not doing this for myself. I'm doing this for my family. And so when separation and divorce happens, and suddenly that parent is being told, you've never been a parent. You've never been to parent-teacher conference, or you never were at a soccer game on a Friday afternoon. They're shocked. They're stunned that what they contributed wasn't parenting. What they contributed wasn't their gift to family. Yeah. So I have to help both parents unpack that. And the other question that I often ask the parent who has been at home, and will just for sake of ease say, maybe that was mom, that was at home, it certainly could be dad, that I often say, were you distressed that your other parent wasn't at that soccer game? And they'll go, well, yes, he could have made time to be there. Were you distressed that you were there alone at parent-teacher? Well, of course I was. And I will say, do we take those same mistakes that maybe have happened over the last 6, 7, 8 years and roll those forward over the next 6, 7, 8 years? Or do we do it better? Do we allow this other parent to step up and step in, as long as they really are going to do that? Yeah. Because in which case, a child gets to have oftentimes a much better relationship with a parent now that they're living in separate residences than they've ever had. And that's a gift.
That's right, that's right. It's interesting, obviously, what you referred to was quite a traditional arrangement, perhaps.
Right.
What about the situations where there's been no relationship between mum and dad, or dad and dad, or mum and mum?
Right.
The separation, well, in fact, there wasn't a separation at all. They just weren't together. Are they still able to enter into a parenting plan, do you think?
You betcha. I'm doing 2 right now for unborn children.
Wow.
It's very challenging. In both cases, neither parent or neither person had intended family. And so pregnancies occurred, and mom decided to maintain the pregnancy. And now dad has decided to be a dad and wants to be a full and sharing dad. Whether, again, it would be, it doesn't matter what well, in this case, it would have to be this. But the point being, again, we have a long walk about how do we do parenting in that situation. We're not in an intimate partnership anymore. We aren't going to be in one. How am I going to support you? And how are you going to support me? And how are we going to raise this child together, speaking of a business relationship that involves enormous feelings. So point being, we work with all those traditional, non-traditional, what I like to call family in all its forms, because goodness knows it comes in many forms, right?
That's right.
And here in our state and in our country, we have actual legal marriage for same-sex partners. And so we're seeing also then parenting plans for 2 moms and 2 dads, and we have surrogacy considerations and adoption, and all those pieces become part of what we do.
Yeah. It's almost as if the relationship or not before the separation doesn't really matter. It's looking forward. What are you going to do from now on? What kind of business relationship can you form from now on?
Well, and at least it's the consideration, because the future does not have to reflect the past. There are court jurisdictions here in the United States that allow the past to inform the future, and that would be a frame of reference that they might use. It's not necessary, and let's go back to that self-determination. If parents determine a parenting plan in a self-determined way with a mediator, even with the help of counsel, it's very rare that the courts would not accept what 2 parents determined was best for their children together. Be very rare. There'd have to be something quite amiss before that would happen.
Yeah. So once you've agreed a parenting plan, are you stuck with it, or can it be changed in the future, do you think?
It's difficult to change, so parents need to know that ahead of time, at least in our area, in our jurisdiction. The courts don't want to see that revisited and revisited and revisited, especially if it was filled with conflict in the first place.
Yeah.
However, if you and I have a parenting plan, and our children now, it's 5 years later, and we go, oh, I say to you, Scott, I think we could do a different residential arrangement that would meet the needs of our 2 children much better. And you said to me, oh, I couldn't agree more. Let's transition to this instead of what we're doing. And I said, oh, beautiful. I think they'll be much happier. All we have to do is write it up. It's done.
Yep.
So in that regard, a change is very easy. Anything that we agree to and want to change, we can change at will anytime. The problem would be if I came to you and said, I want to make this change in our parenting plan, and you said, but I don't. No trumps yes.
Yeah.
That's why we are very thoughtful in creating a parenting plan, so that we hope to allow for the best future possible that we can see from here.
And your book certainly mentioned that no one can look 5, 10, 15 years into the future and know exactly what's going to happen. But you mentioned in your book it's all about creating a plan that would involve you know, how you would deal with that, with any particular changes.
Correct.
And that kind of idea. But what about situations where you've come up with a parenting plan, but down the line one parent chooses to go against it? Can conflict management be built into the plan for that kind of situation?
There is an entire part of the parenting plan for that kind of conflict resolution, and it's typically written in a 3-tier process, at least here in Washington State it is, where a parent would simply need to say, I want to go to conflict resolution. It's not a negotiation, it is a statement. So if I send you that note, you are required to comply. And we would get in front of a mediator or a co-parent coach or some other neutral third party who would try and help us resolve whatever it is that we are struggling with, okay, whatever the issue may be. It could be as simple as our daughter now is ready for middle school, and you want her in an all-girls school, and I don't. And you say, look, this is important enough to me that I believe she will thrive better. I want to go to conflict resolution. You have that option. So we go to that neutral third party. If we're unable to resolve it, then we can bring in our, ideally, family-centered attorneys to help us understand the legal standing on our issue, what our question is, our conflict, right?
Yeah.
And here in Washington State, if that doesn't work, we can always go in front of the courts. Rare, very rare.
That's right. And you mentioned, just in your last words there, attorney, you also mentioned a mediator, you mentioned a coach. In Scotland, the approach seems to be, you know, very much traditionally, if there's an issue that would about the various parts of a parenting plan or the kind of discussions to do with children, we'll just go to court and we'll deal with it that way. But I'm getting a sense from where in your jurisdiction there's a bit more of a team effort to keep you away from court. Is that the case?
That would be 100%. Both the courts want that, and what we understand about families is families are not actually a legal issue. Family problems are family issues. So we want to do our best to resolve them at the level of the family. Now, there could come a point where we need to get the courts involved, but we do everything we can to step away from that and keep most families out of court. I often help parents do a parenting plan where they don't even consult with an attorney until it's complete. And then the attorney drafts the legal document, of course, and gives them the legal education on that legal document. Absolutely. And then it's filed with the court. It's almost like a formality.
Yeah. Well, it sounds as though, because if you've already come to an understanding that results in a parenting plan, it may be that you just don't need anything from the legal system.
Correct.
Yeah. So,
what an ideal situation for children.
Yeah, of course, that's right. So what do you think your final message would be to separating couples or parents coming into building a parenting plan, and what kind of mindset they might want to think about?
Right. It's an important time to work through those complex emotions. And probably the most important piece is that idea that I don't want the mistakes of our past to tumble forward and be the mistakes of our future. Children need both parents. What we know is that separation and divorce restructures a family, but what we don't want to do is destroy that sense of family for children and disadvantage them with a life of parents who are in chronic conflict. Those are the things we want to guard against. There are things called good separation and divorces. There are also destructive elements. We want to go for the former. Get the coaching, get the help you need. That's what I recommend to parents.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much for your time today, Karen. It's been truly inspiring as always. And you've been watching VideoCam and AudioCam.
Thank you.